And here we go.
Welcome to the Great Work Insights Podcast by the O.C. Tanner Institute, the show that features the people, the professionals, the thought leaders, and the coolest companies. And now your host, the man navigating the discussion about the culture, the organized chaos, and the best practices that compel great work, Todd Nordstrom.
I was thinking or remembering the other day some of my earliest jobs. I lasted about a month in the restaurant industry when I was 16, and then about, 6 months or so in retail. And that's when, as a kid, I got frustrated by my options for work, which I wanted to do something awesome, but what kind of work could a 16-year-old kid get that I thought was cool at the time? I had an idea, though, and I don't know why I thought this idea would work, but sometimes ignorance, I guess, can play in our favor. I pulled out the phone book. The internet wasn't around at the time, and I wrote a letter to every radio station in my hometown because I thought it would be cool to work at a radio station. Of course, I wasn't qualified. I begged to do anything. I'd change light bulbs, take out trash, mop the floors, or do anything that would just get me into an industry that I found interesting. And guess what? It worked. I actually got a job. In fact, my boss was so impressed by my proactive approach that he actually offered me a spot on the air as a disc jockey. Here's the problem, though. I had no clue what I was doing. I barely knew what buttons to push, much less what I should say on the air. What was I supposed to talk about? What was I supposed to sound like? What was my, let's call it, radio personality? Was it different than me? Of course, back then I tried to mimic the disc jockeys in my market at the time, and for those of you who are old enough, you might recall those big radio voices, the average hometown disc jockey that would sound like rolling through 40 minutes of your all-time favorites, commercial free, and then they'd give their call letters. Yeah, I was actually awful. That big noise from the belly of my stomach. I sounded like an idiot. I was an idiot, and the harder I tried to sound like other people in town, the more I sounded like an idiot. The story came to mind the other day after I was approached by a former coworker asking if I would talk to his son, who was just promoted to his first management position. The son asked me, how am I supposed to act as a manager? And I thought back to my radio days going, why was I trying to become someone I wasn't? So my response to the son was simple. You were promoted for a reason. I'm guessing your company expects you act like yourself. And I think the son liked that response. Our guest today knows something about acting authentically, especially when it comes to authenticity of leading others. Ray Hodge consults businesses and organizations around the world. He's a notable speaker, having addressed the Department of the Australian Prime Minister and Cabinet. He's known for improving critical efficiencies and increasing key results in numerous aspects of business, including process, finance, marketing, sales, and leadership. Ray, I want to welcome you to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. I appreciate the invitation.
I know you and I could talk about a lot of different topics today because you're kind of known as the improving efficiency guy. But I came across a paper you had written recently, and you caught my attention because the content of the paper was focused on the business impact of authentic leadership. Before we get into the details, I have to say, this seems like somewhat of a random topic for you. The critical efficiency guy is suddenly talking about authenticity. Why the recent focus?
It's a very good question, actually. Well, for me, it really started at a personal level. I've always considered I've been, reasonably self-aware. But some time back, I was seeing a girl, and over a period of about 6 months, she kept asking me the question, "Who are you really?" It seemed like she couldn't grasp this multifaceted person she was seeing daily. You know, on one facet of me is the quiet, reflective, process thinker kind of person. Then I've got an assertive, dominant, impatient side, particularly that comes out in business. And then, I can dance till sunrise and be the life of the party. And she never could grasp, which person she was actually going out with at the time. And it really made me question who my authentic self was, who was the true me, and then what actions and behaviours was I exhibiting that were actually inauthentic. And then around the same time, I went through quite a deep period of depression, and not only did it teach me a lot about myself again through self-reflection and through the psychological help I got at the time, but it really gave me the dual aspect of self-awareness and other awareness. I began to appreciate more fully what others went through and the authenticity of others. So that was really the starting place. And then as I was on that journey myself, it more fully led me to reflect on, how do we as leaders lead in a way that is authentically ourselves when, the wonderful selves and multifaceted, along with an increased awareness of those leaders and employees I was consulting to at the time. So that was really the starting place.
That's fascinating. I mean, and did you find with that girl that you were actually being yourself?
I was. I came out of that. The relationship ended, not because of that, but I came out of it with a much deeper appreciation that it was okay to be me, and that those were the true points at the core of who I was, and it was okay. And I didn't have to apologise for that to anybody for being me. It gave me real freedom in the process of coming out of that and the understanding of that.
Sure, it's interesting because when you talk about the technical definition of authenticity, and I'm not reading out of a dictionary by any means, but authenticity meaning it is what it is. What does authenticity mean for you? And give an example of what authenticity is as opposed to what it isn't.
Yeah, well, I think, as you referred to the dictionary, I mean, when you look at that side of it and the origin of the word, it's that of undisputed origin. It's not a copy, it's genuine, and it's real. And so for me, authenticity at a personal level is about being true to myself. And oftentimes we get caught up in trying to be something for other people, or we restrain, from being the life of the party if we think we're going to get in trouble. But the trouble is we're constricting who our true selves are. And I think for me, again, authenticity is where our behaviours are in alignment with who the real me is. And it relates to my values, my beliefs, personality, my strengths, my talents, and my purpose. And so that for me is authenticity. What, isn't authentic is what I mentioned, is when our behaviours are really misaligned to our true selves. We do things that are in conflict with who we are at the core.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm curious, in the companies you work with around the world, do you think authenticity and leadership, or the lack thereof it, do you think it's a problem? Do you think people are trying, we all move through life in different roles and different levels as we grow, and all the listeners have probably asked themselves at one time or another, who do I need to be now? And the truth is, yeah, we need to be us, right? Do you think, is this a business problem? Is this a human problem?
Yeah, to answer the first one there, I think leadership authenticity is an issue. And from my observations, and this comes from, I've been doing coaching leaders for 25, 30 odd years. Mm-hmm. I think there's two main challenges, and I referred to it earlier, is the whole issue of self-awareness, becoming self-aware, and then the whole thing of other-aware. And I might give a couple of examples here, if that's okay.
Sure, go ahead.
To demonstrate that. So the first one, understanding who we are in order to function in roles most suited to us personally. And sometimes this is an issue as we go along, feeling out of sync. And I was working with an outstanding leader, and his authentic talent, who he was at the core at a business perspective and at a life perspective, was really a developer. He was a startup entrepreneur. And he could grow businesses from the ground up incredibly. What he didn't do well was know the point of when to hand over. And so, this guy in his authenticity was incredible at building businesses. And then when he went outside of his natural gifts and talents to try and manage the business, he just kept throwing the place into chaos. So, his gift, his authentic gift, was constrained to that fast growth, not consolidating that growth. And, in my own case, over a period of time, I took on the contract for a general management role just to have a break from the business I was in. This is many years back. And I tried to fit myself into that role, but only lasted about 12 months while I was managing the place, and I was known as the boring one in the place because of all my spreadsheets and detailed analysis. The managing director in the office next door is flying around the country doing deals and growing the business. And I'm sitting there thinking, this isn't my gig. My gig is actually what he's doing. And I realised at that time that I was actually wired more as a developer than a manager. So again, this comes back to this whole thing of self-awareness and how we're kitted up. But the other major challenge, I think, for leaders is really not understanding and giving credit to the authentic nature of the people that they're working with. And I think one of the main areas there is the placement of people into roles that they're not ideally suited to. And I think the second part of that is honouring people for the different people that they are. Some are quiet, some are the life of the party, and sometimes I think as leaders we try to constrain everybody to be this productive machine rather than freeing people to be their wonderful selves and be productive in their own right.
Yeah, speaking of, do you have any stories that show, let's talk about results for a second. Do you have any stories that show how authenticity has changed business results?
Well, one in that case, and this is a fascinating one. I worked with an accounting firm. Obviously, there's numerous stories. Just tell me when to stop.
Go ahead.
But I worked with an accounting firm, and oftentimes you walk into accounting and legal practices, and everyone's head down, tail up, very quiet, very serious. Well, I worked with an accounting firm for a 7-month project to streamline their processes and get the right people into the right spots. We got a 237% net profit increase over 7 months. It was amazing as we cleared the and we aligned the right people to the right roles according to who they were. The year after I finished that project, the year after, that company went on to post a 42% revenue growth result for the year. But interestingly, when I walk into that place now, you hear laughter, you hear this banter back and forth. But this company and the partners have had the wisdom to allow people to be their true selves, to fit them into the right roles. The partners are funny guys in their own right. They have a great time at work, but yet they're posting these outstanding results. And so you've got this authenticity, leadership, and their people working right throughout the organisation. They're not trying to, constrain people into what they think they should be. Sorry.
I want to play devil's advocate for a second, because I was thinking about a couple things when you were telling that story. Do you think that, because I knew, back when I told my radio story, I knew I wasn't being authentic when I was on the air. Do you think leaders can tell if they're authentic or not? And then the second question I have is, I know it's a weird question, but is there a litmus test to see if we're authentic?
Yeah, I think one of the tests or self-analysis in the whole process of being self-aware through this is the level of conflict that's within us. Since I've come out of that previous relationship and understood who I am more fully, I am so much more free to be me. And I don't really care what other people think, as long as it's not obviously damaging them.
Sure.
But, and even in my writing and in my speaking, I can do things that are according to me. So I think that internal conflict is a really good sign of whether we're trying to be somebody we're not. When I was in the general management role, I had this constant internal conflict of just having to sit at the desk and do detailed analysis, day in, day out, finance management. That wasn't true to me. So I think that's a really good way of understanding from an internal conflict point of view. And some questions that come to mind there is am I leading according, to my true self, or am I constantly having to adapt my behaviour? Like you said in the DJ thing, you want to make sure you're not trying to be someone you're not.
Yeah.
The other thing here is, am I leading from my personal values and purpose and utilising my full suite of talents as much as possible? And I think that's critical, that we lead out of our heart, not just our mind. And a lot of people I come across are very mind-oriented. You want to make sure as a leader you're leading from the core of your heart, from a values and purpose, and then utilising those gifts. There are a couple of things. It's the internal conflict. Am I trying really hard to please everybody and rarely voice my personal views or opinions? I think that's really important. And then I guess the last thing on the other awareness side is, am I honouring and respecting the authentic nature of others? There are probably a couple of things through there.
I love that. So, which leads to another question. Let's say I'm listening to this and I'm thinking about somebody that I work with, and I don't think they're being their authentic selves. Would you have advice for me? What do I do with that? Somebody else who's not authentic, or at least I think they're not.
Yeah, that's a great question. And obviously my role day in, day out is working in this whole environment of making sure, people are flourishing. And if they're not flourishing, they're exiting, And so, my advice to everyone I work with is really, if you think somebody's inauthentic and is a little bit of a misfit, just simply take time with them. It's one of the, and I know it becomes, comes from a pressure-cooked environment for executives and managers, business owners. It's a complex business environment. There's a lot of heat on us. But one of the things that I think leaders would do very well in practicing more fully is understanding their people, and understanding what their values are, what their life priorities are, what their challenges are. Because sometimes I think we suspect someone's a bit inauthentic, but when we get to understand them, we realise they might be in a role that's not ideally suited for them, so they're trying, or they might be doing a few stupid things. And when we actually understand them and help them in their work, believe in them, communicate our value to them, they flourish. So seeking to shift them into a role that's ideal. I think the other thing is being upfront about pointing out behaviours that are seemingly inconsistent to who they are. So really that whole side is coming to understand a person and help them in their journey of authenticity. And then, the other side, and I've come across this, if people are just simply dare I say, an idiot, or acting, continually as an idiot. They're destroying their department. They're toxic in the workplace. They won't change. No amount of help that you address with them will shift. Just help them exit.
Nice. That was great advice. You are an author as well. Can you tell us about your last book? Who is the appropriate audience, and what will people learn from it?
Yeah, this is this book I recently wrote called Smash the Bottleneck. It's how to improve critical process efficiencies for dramatically increased key results. And that's come out of my work in this whole process alignment. It's written for service-based organisations. I've worked a lot with service-based firms, whether that's trade, electrical, plumbing, it might be accounting, legal, logistics, industrial area. And so it's really simply about getting rid of waste and streamlining processes. My next book that will come out will be on the people side, but because I've really seen that when you've got streamlined processes and authentic people and leadership working at the ideal process points for them, you've got a very efficient and productive, high-performance driven organisation.
Absolutely. Awesome. Ray, you've given some great advice today. Given me some stuff to think about, all of us some stuff to think about, I think both inside and outside of work. If listeners want to learn more about you, your book, where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, rayhodge.com.au. And I've on there, I regularly write. I've got a weekly newsletter, monthly newsletter, blog, so people are more than welcome to subscribe. They're all free. And the other thing I wanted to mention, I thought of this as we've been going through it. When I went through that whole process of increased self-awareness for myself, I developed a worksheet over the time to help me understand, what my talents were, what my purpose was, what my values were, what my misaligned or potentially misaligned actions were. And I'm more than willing to send that worksheet to anybody who wants to get in touch via the website or even directly ray@rayhodge.com.au. That might help listeners become increasingly self-aware.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And you've been awesome, and thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. I really appreciate it.
Feeling inspired, motivated, encouraged? We want to hear from you. Rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. And be sure to visit octanner.com for more podcasts and how you can inject great work and employee recognition into your organization. Now go out and make a difference within your organization.